Yes, hello, my name is C0LONIALISM from Edukea Tanzania. Welcome in this session to proceed with our topic or the last topic in History 2 advanced level, which is new colonialism and the questioning of underdevelopment in the third world countries. On the last session, we ended on the achievement of South-South dialogue or cooperation. So now let us see the last concept or the last part of our topic, which is Structural Adjustment Program or SAP. What is the Structural Adjustment Program? It is referred to the list of budgetary and policy changes required on the third world countries by the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank (WB) to qualify for loans from them. It means that these are policies or budgetary and policy changes which are settled or prepared by the World Bank and the IMF towards less developed countries or third world countries in order to qualify for loans be provided by IMF or World Bank. SAP was established in 1918s. It means that SAP was established in 1980s. Following the worsening economic conditions in many African countries in 1980, were conditioned to approach the IMF and the World Bank to ask for assistance, through which IMF and World Bank set conditions which Sub-Sahara had to follow in order to qualify for loans. It means that following the worsening economic conditions in 1980, various Sub-Saharan countries were required to seek the international assistance, and the assistance which they sought, it will be help for them. It was International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to give them the loans, and those international financial bodies were set some conditions which will guide those less developed countries to qualify for that loans. So let us see the factors that prospered the SAP by the IMF and the World Bank. The first factor was the question of dependence syndrome. It means that the factors which made the structural adjustment program to prosper by the IMF and World Bank towards the less developed countries was the question of dependence syndrome in less developed countries. It means less developing countries, especially in Africa and other countries in Asia, are depending in developed countries to get assistance. For example, in economic assistance, whereby they lack financial or funds in running their activities. So the main solution was to go in International Monetary Funds and World Bank to seek for financial assistance. So these were the factors that prospered or led to the SAP by IMF and World Bank to set some conditions for less developed countries. Another, it is the question of rapid decline of gross domestic product. It means that the rapid decline of gross domestic product in many sub-Saharan countries, that was the main factor that led them to ask or to seek for assistance in International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. For example, in 1980s up to 1987, about 20% of the gross domestic product of sub-Saharan countries declined. So the result was that third world countries to go in that international financial bodies to seek for financial assistance. Another factor was the question of foreign import purchase. It means that the import purchase in less developed countries or third world countries was declined and up to 40% from the year of 1980 up to 1985. The percent was up to 40% of import purchase as it was fell or declining. So what was the best way or solution to solve the problem of foreign import purchase was to seek assistance from the international financial organs, which were IMF and World Bank, and until now they are still operating and placing the harsh conditions for the less developed countries to qualify for the loans. Another factor is decline in the provision of social services. It means that the provision of social services in less developed countries or in the third world countries was declined, and that's why the government of third world countries decided to seek assistance in international monetary funds and the World Bank in order to overcome or to countercheck the problem in social services to the population of the government of the country. For example, the provision of social services like health services, education services was declined or was collapsed due to the absence of funds which will support the provision of service, and thus they suggested that the less developed countries must introduce the cost sharing, maybe in hospitals, schools, and other social service provider centers. So in that way that the IMF and the World Bank prospered the structural adjustment program. Another was the fall in export earnings. It means that the fall in export earnings between 1986 up to 1987, about 40% would fail because they had they become poor in economic, and they hadn't enough funds to support the export earnings because of high tariffs and taxes which must be paid before exporting goods or services in international or outside of the country. So the fall in export was about 40% in that year, so that led to the less developed countries or African countries especially led to the seeking assistance from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to rescue the situation which were suffering, which were countering the less developed countries. Another is expansion of external debt. It means the debt of sub-Saharan countries was increased. For example, in 1987, external debt reached to $129 billion or billion US dollar. It means that the expansion of external debt in less developed countries was increased. So what was the main solution for the less developed countries to do was to rush and go to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank to seek assistance, and that condition was that they were pressed by high interest rate to be paid for those loans which were supposed to loan from those international financial bodies, which is World Bank and the IMF. So you can see when it reached in this year, the external debt of African countries or sub-Saharan countries reached to $129 billion. So you can see it is large amount of money, and it will just see like a burden for those less developed countries to be paid. So let us, after looking at the factors that prospered the SAP or the Structural Adjustment Program by IMF and World Bank, let us see the conditions which were settled by this world or international financial organs to SAP towards the less developed countries. The first one was reduction of government spending on social services. It means that those IMF and World Bank told the less developed countries that they have to reduce the spending on social services, or the spending of social services must be reduced, and introduce the cost sharing, whereby the citizens will contribute some amount and the government will contribute, for example, in buying the medicine and hiring the professionals who will provide the services in different areas, like in hospitals, and hiring teachers in schools and the other social services provider centers. So the government of less developed countries were supposed to reduce government spending on social services and introduce cost sharing. And in some countries, like in Tanzania, during the reign of Joseph Pombe Magufuli, was introduced the free education. So you can see how that that president was bringing was avoided the cost sharing, and the students from primary levels and the secondary levels were getting the education service for free, and social services and the other social services like hospitals, the patients were getting the service free or by paying a little amount of money. So you can see that condition which was settled by World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, that will guide the structural adjustment program towards the less developed countries. Another was devaluation of local currencies. The aim of IMF and World Bank to introduce structural adjustment program was to tell the less developed countries on devaluate their local currencies. As we know that in many less developed countries or third world countries, their currencies are devaluated by the IMF and the World Bank. So you can see the value of local currencies in third world countries is low compared to the currency of developed countries. For example, in the $1 is equal to almost 2,004.4 and 2,450 Tanzanian shilling. The value of $1 is equal to Tanzanian shillings of 2,450. So you can see that the Tanzanian shilling have no value towards the US dollar. So this was another conditions that was placed by the international financial bodies in order for the sub-Saharan countries to qualify of getting loans. Another was privatization. It means that this was another condition that was set by SAP in influencing these developed countries to privatize the public enterprises into the private hands or foreign investment. So you can see that various public enterprises like banks, like plantations and other industries and other projects have been privatized to the few hands of the people or under the capitalists. So this was another condition of SAP to less developed countries qualify for loans. Another was adoption of multi-party politics or multi-party system. This was another condition which was placed by World Bank and the International Monetary Fund towards the less developed countries, that they have to adapt the multi-party politics, whereby a country must have multiple political parties that will compete in getting power, and those political parties will have a candidate who will compete for power against the other fellow political parties. For example, in Tanzania, the multi-party politics or multi-party system was introduced in 1992, and the implementation was in 1995. So was the condition which was placed by the World Bank and the International Monetary Funds that will guide structural adjustment program toward the third world countries. Another condition was introduction of liberalization. Introduction of liberalization, it was through the introduction of trade liberalization, which will bring the free trade, whereby the government should not interfere in trade activities. So the people or traders will have to control the trade within the country. So those foreigners wanted those less developed countries to pronounce trade liberalization in order for them to be free for coming in less developed countries to invest and to ensure there is free trade and free competition in trade. So that was another condition that was placed by IMF and the World Bank in order to give the loans for third world countries. Another was the removal of barriers to export and imports. It means that the less developed countries were forced or were conditioned to remove trade barriers in exports and imports of goods and services from or out the country. It means that this was aiming at bringing the freeness or freedom of trade towards the imperialist powers or the Western countries to export and import the goods from their countries towards the less developed countries. So you can see that was another principle condition of SAP, in which that was taking place or operating. For example, export. That was done when the imperialist powers were exporting natural resources which were accumulated or which are accumulated by the multinational corporations or multinational companies which are introduced in third world countries. So those natural resources like minerals, agricultural products like sisal, cotton and whatever are being exported without any barriers or tariffs or high tariffs. And the import, it is the importation of manufactured goods from abroad to be easier or to make the free door for them to import the manufactured goods within or in less developed countries. So this was another condition of World Bank and the International Monetary Fund that will govern SAP and toward the third world countries. And the last condition was retirement of public workers. It means that another condition was to retire or retirement of the public workers in the less developed countries. It means that the old people must retire when they reach on the age of 60 years old, so that they can give the chance or the way for young people to be employed and to generative for economic development of the less developed countries. As in many developing countries, the retirement age is 60 years old. When a person reaches that year, must retire and give the loan for the young people or for the youth or for the graduated personnel to be hired in different public sectors or public positions in order to increase the production and growth of the economy, because they believe that we believe that the old people are no longer productive because they are old and their productive capacity is being decreased. So the youth, because they are still stronger and they have ability to produce highly rather than or more than those older people. So this was another condition of SAP. We are proceeding with the impact of the SAPs or structural adjustment programs on the developing nations. The first impact, it weakens national sovereignty of the less developed countries. It means SAP or structural adjustment program has weakened the national sovereignty of the less developed countries. In which way? In the way that those international financial bodies has led to the intervention or intervene or the engagement on the less developed countries' affairs, so that they can exploit them. So you can see that the sovereignty of the less developed countries has been weakened, whereby the less developed countries fail to make their own decisions without any interference from the foreign domination. But the SAP has weakened the freedom of less developed countries to make their own decision without any intervention from foreign countries or from foreign domination. But another impact, it has led to the changes of ideologies and the economic system. It means that structural adjustment programs in third world countries have led to the changes of ideologies and the economic system. For example, in many third world countries, there were countries which were under the capitalist ideology and others were under socialism ideology. So those especially which were under socialism ideologies have been changed into capitalism ideologies. For example, in Tanzania was a socialist country, but now it is in capitalist ideology, because the main sponsors or the main assistants are the capitalist countries. So they force or they condition it to follow their ideologies in order to qualify for loans. And Kenya is the capitalist country. Almost many countries in the world or in the less developed countries are the capitalist in nature, and their economic system are capitalist based economic system, whereby there is freedom of trade, there is competition in trade or production, and there is freedom of traders to fix their prices, and there is democracy. So another impact, it has increased the debt burden. It means the burden of debt in less developed countries has been increased because structural adjustment program condition them to depend condition them on the harsh conditionalities which make them to rise or to fall on external debts or external loans, where the less developed countries seek assistance or financial assistance from the wealthy wealthy financial organs or bodies like IMF and the World Bank. Another, it has led to multi-party system or politics. It means that the structural adjustment program has led to the multi-party system, whereby the African or less developed countries have become multi-party nations with the multiple political parties for competing in attaining the powers in the government or in the ruling the government. As I told you an example of Tanzania, as the multi-party system was introduced in 1992. Another impact, it has increased the unemployment in less developed countries because there is influx of foreign skilled and knowledgeable experts from the developed countries, so that they can supervise and control the various projects which are established in less developed countries. So the local people become unemployed because of the lack of skills and the knowledge concerning with certain projects which have been introduced. For example, the extraction of gas in Mtwara and other natural resources have been deprived the local peoples to be employed there as professional, but rather than employed as unskilled and semi-skilled people, because they don't have enough skills and the knowledge about or concerning with the extraction of gases and the minerals like gold in Geita and other projects which have been introduced. But another impact, it led to the inadequate provision of social services. It means that the provision of social services has become inadequate because the introduction of cost sharing, and that led to some people fail to have the ability to afford that cost sharing which have been introduced by the less developed countries, as they were conditioned by the structural adjustment program which are under the control of International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the WB, World Bank. So the provision of social services have been inadequate, and that led to the poor social services, like in education service, in all levels of education. There is inadequate provision of service, whereby the service or education which is provided based much on Western system of education, and which is not suit the environment of the less developed countries. But in health services, the service which produced in hospitals does not adequate. It is inadequate to the people who are in need with the service which are provided in the hospitals and dispensaries. You may find that a patient is taken to the hospital, but there is no medicine for curing that disease. So the solution, they tell that patient or their relatives to buy those medicine in the pharmacy or in other hospitals. And the last one, it had increased the corruption. It means that the sub or structural adjustment programs has been increased the corruption among the leaders in the in the various positions in the government, because there is illegal activities which are done in the country because of the presence of foreigners or foreign dominations. For example, in export and import. For example, in export of minerals or natural resources from the less developed countries to the abroad, there is an unequal or there is illegal agreements between the leaders and the peoples who are responsible for that activities with the leaders. So that led to the increase of corruption. And these were the impacts of the SAP on the developing nations. So there is an exercise here which comprises two questions. The first one, it is explain the principles of structural adjustment programs, and the second one, it is assess the impacts of structural adjustment programs on the less developed countries. So until there, this is the end of our topic. Thank you for being with me until the end. So I congratulate you and I thank you for advance or in advance, and I welcome you to proceed in other topics. Have a good day.